Welcome to Psych Sessions Re-Release. This is a curated series of episodes that we have recorded over the years that may have been lost in the library. So enjoy listening to some of the best from Psych Sessions.
You won't remember this, but we chatted briefly after your 2018 talk at RMPA, the teaching talk that you gave that I thought was just lovely. And so, but you've talked to 200,000 people in your lifetime, so I wouldn't expect you to remember that. So. I assume you've met this other fellow on the screen.
Yes, indeed. We've published together, for that matter, too.
Have you?
That talk in 2017 or 18, he turned into a version which was publishable.
That's right. You collaborated on that. I think I did some gentle arm twisting after the fact because it was a talk about teaching, and teaching's been a big part of your career, hasn't it?
Oh, yes.
And I know at one time you were president of Division II, if I recall. Is that correct? Yeah. So I think we're just going to jump in.
At the time was teaching 1966 psychology in 1966.
That's when you started.
Yeah, no, that's when I was president.
Oh, 1966.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I reviewed some things about your career, and well, we're just going to jump around. I hope that's okay with you.
Sure.
When I ask people about when I hear they're going to retire, I've started to ask this question: are you going to really retire, or are you going to fake retire? and Michael, I think you have fake retired because I just saw that you've published a book this year, right?
Who?
You.
2 books.
Oh, I'm sorry, 2 books.
Just out now is this one. Just got the copy. June 23rd, A Brief History of Psychology, 6th edition.
Oh, my goodness.
And then in January came out my autobiography, Facets of an Academic's Life.
Oh, my goodness. So you're a great example of the operational definition of fake retire.
Well, that's one way. It's de jure and de facto.
All right. I'm sorry.
I've been retired de jure for decades. De facto, I think, as of 2 weeks ago.
Is that really true, or do you have another project that you're working on with Doug?
Not working on with Doug. There's a possibility of some more stuff with my daughter, who's been very helpful in all of my, especially recent book projects. K.W. Watkins, she graduated from Swarthmore College with highest honors. One of 3 people. I graduated from there many years earlier with high honors. She went on for a master's in English at the University of Colorado. Realized she couldn't get much of a job after that. Was going on at CU. Went on to Yale for a PhD in English. Dan has been a wordsmith ever since and has helped me on an awful lot of projects since.
I suspect
there's a couple of projects I make with her. One is called Cultural Aspects of Language, which would be a version of a seminar, undergraduate and graduate, and I offered the last 10 years or so that I was still working officially. That might still turn into a book. I'm not sure with her. Another one is a cookbook, of all things. Been on the back burner for I don't know how many decades.
I have a feeling that collaboration with your daughter is a mutually beneficial relationship.
It's especially beneficial to me, but she considers that something that makes it all worthwhile for her.
You mentioned that you were president of Division II back in 1962, and I remember. I'm sorry.
66.
66. Thank you. And you were at the University of Colorado Boulder, I believe, all of your professional career. Is that correct?
Oh, I spent 3 years at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, from my PhD in 52 until 1955. And then have been at Colorado ever since, although I spent a year sabbatical at APA in 1970 as acting administrative officer for educational affairs, I think.
Very interesting. I wanted to ask you, I think you're well-renowned for a lot of things, including your research, but it's clear that teaching was important to you as well.
Very much so.
Was that a hard sell for you amongst your research-intensive colleagues, or did they easily accept it from you, or was that seen as was it looked upon as, why are you wasting your time with all that teaching stuff, or was that not the case for you?
Not really. It didn't contribute much to my reputation with my colleagues, but I don't think it deterred from it. What did deter was committee work. The usual, officially it was 20% of your evaluation for research, teaching, and service. But de facto, at least in places like University of Colorado, became something like 80 or 90% research, or even more for getting outside funds, and a negative contribution for committee work service.
Yeah, the 40-40-20 is kind of a fantasy. I think it's usually more like 60-60-50. It doesn't really ever add.
I think it's more like, let's see, if it's research, publication, that used to be higher than it is now. Maybe now it's about 30 or 40. Getting outside funds is 60 or 70, or 80 or 90, and service is minus the rest. Get it back down to 100.
Doug, what were you going to say?
I was going to ask if you'd be willing to talk a little bit. You notice that this is a transition from the 50s and 60s, the increasing emphasis on...
I can hardly hear you.
Thank you. Let me scooch a little closer and try that again. Since the 1950s or 60s, you noted that the emphasis on grants has grown substantially.
Oh, yes.
What are the consequences of that for universities?
Substantial. I don't know about the universities, but about the faculty members. I know for me, my marketability was much lower than that of some of my younger colleagues before I retired. And it meant that they were getting substantially more advantage from their marketability than I was from my non-marketability. Their salaries were higher. They got tenure more quickly than most other people, and so on, by getting outside funds. And, well, I guess that's part of the article that you and I were involved with too, Doug. The universities are becoming much more business-oriented. They are considered to be not institutions that support important social benefits, but money-making enterprises. And one result of that is that faculty and staff are not getting the kinds of emolument increases that they used to get, while there's a proliferation of administrators who in turn end up getting huge improvements in their emoluments as a function of how much money they can help bring in. And you end up with these enormous debts on the part of students because so much of the tuition goes to these, from my point of view, unnecessary administrators who are getting to this.
You're talking about students and being in the classroom. When you were in the classroom, I'm thinking about one of the 2 books that you published in 2020 compared to the 0 books that I've published in 2020. The History of Psychology book. Did you teach History of Psych in the classroom when you were back in the classroom at Boulder?
Oh, yes. I think I did that for almost every semester, certainly every year.
I suspect, and if I'm wrong, I will apologize. I suspect not only did you teach it, but you knew of it firsthand quite a bit. Not only the longevity of your career, but the family lineage, so to speak. Was that fair to say?
Partly the family lineage, but also in graduate school, Edwin G. Boring was one of my advisors. I think I was a TA for him in History of Psychology as well as Introductory Psychology as a grad student. And here at Colorado, Carl Münzinger was very interested in history of psychology. And he did an excellent course in it. So
I just want to back up a minute. So I'm not as much of a of an aficionado of history of psych as Doug is, but I am a little bit, and I've taught the course here at Boise State, and I do love the subject matter. So what you're telling me, sir, is that you were a teaching assistant to E.G. Boring?
Yes. And to B.F. Skinner back at Harvard.
Now, I had done my homework and saw when you got your PhD at Harvard, and I noted, and then I went back and looked at when he was at Harvard, and I knew there was overlap, and I did plan to ask you about that. So you were teaching assistant and took classes from both of those individuals.
Yeah.
Would you mind, I'm just going to shut up for a minute. Would you mind just chatting about what that experience was like and what those two gentlemen were like?
Maybe I'll go back a little ways.
Sure.
I think what little education I got after elementary and high school was at Swarthmore College as an undergraduate. The first 2 years, if you did reasonably well, you could so-called read for honors your last 2 years. And what that involved was no more classes those last 4 semesters, but 2 seminars each semester, one in a major and one in one or 2 minors. These seminars were taught usually at the professors' homes once a week, officially meeting from, say, something like 6:30 to 8:30, but de facto starting at 6:30 and going off until midnight. Small groups, as few as 2 to as many as 8 or 9 or 10 in a seminar. You write a paper each week in each seminar. You were never graded by your professors.
Right.
Paid for a total change in the relationship between faculty and student. No more apple polishing, but instead you tried to squeeze your professors for whatever knowledge they had that you wanted in the subject matter. The last month at Swarthmore was hell. You had 8 side examiners. You had a 3-hour written and a 1-hour oral for each of the 8 seminars you had. And after that ordeal, the group got together, decided whether you highest honors, high honors, honors, no honors, not even graduating, that kind of thing. From that to Johns Hopkins University, where I got a master's, felt like going back to high school.
I'm sorry, were you a psychology major at Swarthmore?
Yes. I started out, I think, in French literature, then moved to linguistics. The third major declaration was philosophy, and the last one was psychology. Yeah. But then at Johns Hopkins, Köhler sent me there because he thought I'd had too many humanities and that kind of soft stuff. I got a master's at Hopkins. To repeat, well, they used true, false, and multiple choice exams instead of essay exams, which I got used to at Swarthmore. Harvard was no better. I did have some excellent instructors. Carl Lashley, for one. He was a brilliant lecturer without notes in the pro seminar at Harvard. Smitty Stevens, with whom I officially did my doctorate. Boring. Skinner. I never was taught anything about teaching. And I envy Doug. He had some experiences that as a graduate student. And I think, well, quite aside from his own brilliance, the fact that he had that training helped him. I never had any. I got awards for teaching, and I still wonder how the hell I'm always dubious about the effectiveness of my teaching. And the little bit of reading I did in the history of research on educational psychology, the lecture method is obviously the least efficient. And yet that's the one that's still widely used. And part of the article with Doug was that instead of being forced to lecture, those of us who were never trained to and who are lousy lecturers, we won't be permitted to lecture anymore. Now there's going to be, there already are these online courses available with brilliant lecturers on almost any subject, far superior to that of most tenured faculty members. That matter is another issue, the whole tenure issue.
Right.
Tenure has been disappearing in parts outside of the United States and Europe, but also slowly also eroding in the United States and Europe. More and more courses are being taught by underpaid outsiders who have temporary appointments.
But I don't think anything could replace those last 2 years that you had at Swarthmore, could it? I mean,
No, nothing.
Being in faculty members' homes and small groups and
Yes.
you know, that salon kind of experience.
That and the sheer joy and excitement of following where ideas lead. Going to the lab, doing some studies that you think of that haven't ever been done before, even though they're minor. Doing whatever makes sense intellectually. That it's exciting.
I went to a small private liberal arts school in the Midwest in the 1980s. And
which one?
Monmouth College in Monmouth, Illinois.
Huh?
And there were one or two professors who tried to replicate. It was just a semester-long experience, but they would invite us into their homes, and it would be from 7 to 9 p.m., and we would have a small group discussion. And, I remember these experiences 38 years later as, someone trusting me as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old person into their home. And, even though they weren't even psychology classes. I'm fascinated by your litany through 4 different subjects and landing on psychology. We're all glad that you did. And I have to ask you this, and I apologize for the memory quiz. Do you have any recollection at all who the author was of your introductory psychology textbook? I'm sorry to ask a memory question.
I think my introductory psychology course was at Swarthmore. I think Kula taught it, and I don't remember. I certainly remember Boring, Langfeld, and Weld. Once I got to Swarthmore, to Harvard, that was a major introductory text back then. Cliff Morgan at Hopkins also had an introductory. May have used one of Kula's books, but I'm not sure.
And one of the things that I just marveled as I was listening to your story, Michael, is that you're using names in the history of psychology the way that I would not. So, for example, you mentioned a fellow S.S. Stevens, but that's not what you called him. You called him by the name that you knew him, right? Even though I will use the name gently, Fred Skinner. I didn't know Fred Skinner. I know him as B.F. Skinner. So, Doug and I had
he insisted that his graduate students and other people call him Fred.
Really?
He was quite very nice.
Can you tell me
again of the honors business? That honors experience at Swarthmore also got me very interested in the honors program in psychology at the University of Colorado, which I ran for, I guess, close to 40 years. Found tremendously rewarding experience. The brightest students didn't need to bother. There was a second tier who weren't quite sure of their own abilities. And when they were able to do reasonably well in a couple of required seminars, design, carry out, analyze, defend a project for their thesis, do reasonably well in final exams for honors, and convincing them, by golly, that maybe they did have something. They could do it after all. That was so rewarding. Literally hundreds of those.
Did you figure out over your time and experience the secret sauce of how to do that? Or did you have to do it individually per student?
It's a nice question. It was always individually per student. But there were certain principles such as respect, which unfortunately I did not experience at either Harvard or Hopkins.
Really? Could you talk a little bit Do you feel comfortable talking a little bit more about that?
Sure. At Swarthmore, again, in the honors program, there was a huge respect for the faculty, but the faculty also respected the students. And I had some fellow students in many courses that one respected. That, well, as I mentioned, it's the form of tests at Hopkins, multiple choice, true, false kind of stuff. That doesn't show a respect for the student. And while at Harvard, from people like Stevens, Newman, Boring, Bekeshe even, the fact that my last name was Wertheimer, back when my father's was still far better known than it is now anymore, there was a little respect, but certainly not the kind of thing that you had, that I had at Swarthmore. Somehow the idea was the task of the faculty member is to stick a funnel in the brains of undergraduate and graduate students and pour knowledge in.
Gotcha.
And let it come out of the mouth and the fingers.
Doug, you were going to say something?
Certainly. You mentioned before in a Gestalt seminar that I got to take with you in 1995. Where I had a wonderful time, and I'll say not only did I have a wonderful time, I learned a tremendous amount that still shows up in my work and my writing. So let me cheer for you as an effective teacher. You mentioned in there that Fred Skinner started his advanced behavior analysis seminars with an invitation to find something his theory could not explain. What were those experiences like, especially given your last name and arrival at Harvard and the circumstances? What was that like?
It was a very sobering and interesting and educational experience for me. Yes, Skinner started his seminar by asking for any example of any behavior of any creature, human or otherwise, that could not be fully explained, whatever that means, by his simple principles of reinforcement. And all of us, class, oh, what a nice challenge. Of course, we'll come up with all kinds of things. We couldn't. Once you got into the framework of Skinner's behavioristics, that approach was able to account in a rational, rigorous way for almost virtually any experience, behavior any of us could think of. And I guess it helped convince me that there is no single best theory of psychology as such, that there are different ways of looking at behavior and experience, and that almost all of the ones that have been proposed have some positive features, and that a really prudent approach is to accept what's good and works, pragmatic kind of thing, from almost any kind of theory.
I promise we're going to stop talking about B.F. Skinner really soon. I think maybe this will be my last question, and because I think you knew him well from what I can surmise. Do you think did he really mean it? Did he really mean radical behaviorism? I mean, or was he just kind of winking at us and no, there's all this other stuff that we really can't see, that, you know, there really is love. You know,
of course he agrees there is love. This was no pretense. He believed all this stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
As I mentioned in my memoir, I still have a memory of his being at a cocktail party at Harvard, and after 2 or 3 martinis, raising his glass modestly and saying, "Psychology began with E.F." I think he was convinced he had the right way of dealing with it as a natural science. What determines behavior? Past, current stimulus situation, history. You need very few concepts to do a proper natural science analysis of the subject matter of psychology.
So, Michael, but before you got to Swarthmore, as you're growing up, if I did my timeline right, you really didn't get to interact with your father as a psychologist.
Never. No.
I think you were in high school when he passed away. But clearly, his career in psychology and the importance of Gestalt psychology and what he did influenced your career.
No question.
Would you mind just talking about him and your relationship and what that meant for you personally and professionally to wherever you want to go with that would be welcome.
Well, when I was a child, he was a very warm, supportive, grandfatherly type of figure. He was old enough to be my grandfather. I was unaware of his prominence in scholarly circles until my early teens, I guess, when I noticed how revered he was by a lot of guests we had often for dinner at the house. As I also, Doug knows about this, so I mentioned in my memoir, I had a wonderful time at summer camp in New York, and as a young teenager. I was given the opportunity to be a junior counselor in the summer of 1943, but by then I'd become sufficiently aware of my father's prominence that I naively assumed, if I spend a couple of months writing his biography, that would be worthwhile. It would be so easy. I suggested it to him. He said, "Oh no, you counselor." He did. And that October he was gone. I had become aware of it. So ever since I was 16, I had intended to write his biography. I had finally did come out with Brett King, I think in 2005 or 2007, something like that. And I'm sure also having his last name helped me get into Swarthmore, helped me get into Hopkins, Harvard, helped me in my job at Wesleyan, even helped me get my job at CU, Boulder. And my chances are it helped me get the various elected positions that I held with APA. I don't know how many decades I was president of some division or chair of some committee or board or something like that. I was involved for many, many years with APA, partly because of my last name.
May I?
Sure.
I have a very bad habit on this podcast of, hopefully it never comes off as arguing with people, and I certainly respectfully, I don't want to do that with you, sir. But,
feel free to argue.
Well, I don't want to do that, but it may have been that your last name got you noticed on a job application, or it got someone's attention. But unless faculty jobs have changed dramatically or APA division presidencies have changed dramatically, those typically are just given away by name only. There had to be credentials and skills and abilities and problem solving and decision making and conflict resolution. Well, for the very first leadership thing that you had done, if you had messed it up badly, I doubt if you had been asked over and over and over. With all due respect.
I think it was partly my experience at Swarthmore that got me so often into the position of chair of various boards and committees. At Swarthmore, which started as a Quaker school, by the time I got there, that was sort of a minor thing, but I've forgotten, it was probably the second or third semester that I was Swarthmore. One of my fellow students suggested I go to a meeting. Well, there's a meeting house over there. I did. It's a small square building, the interior of which is one big room with 4 benches around the center, several levels of, and Quaker meeting. Everybody sits down, silence, maybe silence for a full hour, or often somebody would have some kind of a message that seemed worth sharing, would stand up, speak for no more than a minute, brief minute message, sit down, there'd be silence, everybody would contemplate that for a little while. Maybe another related or unrelated message, a few minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later. At the end of the meeting, the clerk shook hands with the people next to the clerk. Everybody else shook hands. There was some discussion of joys and sorrows afterwards. Somebody had a sorrow, like a relative who was ill, hold that person in the light for maybe 30 seconds. And there were various kinds of beliefs and practices associated with Quakerism that I found very congenial. One is the idea that there's that of God in everyone, and that one's job is to try to bring that out and to try to help others around one bring it out of them. Another was the way to come to decisions in groups, not by vote, with the majority winning, but hashing it through enough so that everybody can come to the same unanimous conclusion about what's the best way to handle a given issue. Even in high school, Fieldston School, which is related to the ethical culture movement. I had a weekly half-hour meeting, usually with no more than 6 or 8 students, all through the whole school year, with an Algernon D. Black called Ethics. And in that half hour, the usual discussion was either some current issue, current event, not the best way to do that, to handle that, but what are the various alternatives and what are their pros and cons? And a critical thinking through. That I found similar to this Quaker practice of hashing a problem out with all the different points of view and listening to each other, and then coming to a consensus that everybody could agree to. And I was chair of, education and training board, all kinds of boards and committees of APA, and used that technique. It meant everything took a little longer. Usually there was enthusiasm and unanimity about decisions that were made.
Well, Michael, I appreciate that because that reveals a very thoughtful skill set that had been honed and practiced over time, and not that you just did things and got things because of your name. So thank you very much. I've got one more specific question, and I have not let Doug play at all, and I apologize for that. And I know he's got some topics that he wants to ask you about. I have this notion, and I think it might have come from when I took history and systems in my graduate school training.
Where was that?
Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. This would have been in 1987, 1988, probably.
Remember who got it?
Yeah, Jim McHose. He was the department chair. He had gone to the University of Iowa, and he had been around. Who would have been the big name at the time at Iowa?
Doesn't matter. Spence?
Yes, thank you. Spence and Taylor Spence. Yes, that combo. Yeah, Janet Taylor Spence, and then
Jim Spence.
Yes, of course. You know the names better than I do. Of course you do, because you knew them well and you were best friends with them, of course. But I remember this notion of there might have been a time in psychology, and it might have been in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, that there could have been a person at some point in that era who knew everything about psychology. That psychology was still young enough. Things were still coming out in small enough numbers in journals. There were a low enough journal, at least in the English-speaking world of psychology, I should qualify.
For that matter, I remember, at least in my earliest years, I was an enthusiastic subscriber to psychological abstracts and would actually read them covered in the early years, in the early 50s.
You might have been that person, because I think 40s and 50s, somewhere in there, psychology was still small enough where 6,000 articles a year might come out. And by the way, sir, I remember psychological abstracts because I would go to the library and page through. And the beauty of that was, what our students don't realize now, is that once I found my abstract, the one ahead of it and behind it was related to it. But now, when you zero in on psych info, no one ever goes one forward and one back.
Same kind of thing when you go into the stacks in a library.
I miss the stacks. I miss the cards. I do woodworking. I want to find those old card stacks and refurbish them and use them for something. I'm gonna let. I know Doug's got some great questions.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, you did not, sir. I have this romantic notion that there was a point in time when a singular person could know everything or read every journal and know everything that there was to know about psychology, and then there was a tipping point, and it got to be too voluminous.
Well, the tipping point, I think, came before I got my PhD in 52, although I was still pretending it was still possible. Okay. Obviously it wasn't. I did become president of the Division of General Psychology, too, I think partly because of that, Division 1. And theoretical and philosophical psychology and history of psychology, not to mention senior psychology.
Yeah, 1, 2, 26, and I don't know the number for the other ones.
24 and 1.
Oh my goodness. Doug, it's your turn. You've been very patient.
Something that Eric may not know about you like I know about you is the experiences you've had in the mountains and on water and boating. How did you balance your family, your work life, and the very, very important drives that are so prominent through your autobiography to be on the boat, on the water, and in the mountains and on the rock? How did you balance all of these different activities?
It's a great question.
Intuitively, I guess, is the answer. It was never fully successful. I don't think I neglected my kids all that much. They obviously were involved in these things too. Skiing, not so much rock climbing, boating too, very much. And grandkids, and to some extent great-grands by now too. These are all facets of an academic's life, the title of my autobiography, and they interact. They're not independent. And even the work. My kids and grandkids have helped me with a lot of proofreading of stuff I published, for example. I mentioned my daughter helped me immeasurably, including making indexes for books and so on and so on and so on.
I hope at some point in your archives or in your family, you're going to share pictures. I hope you were big picture takers.
Oh, there is no end of pictures. If you take a look at my The Facets of an Academic's Life, a memoir published by Springer in January 2020, the ebook version is a little cheaper than the paper, and it has some of the pictures in color. I think there's over maybe some 400 or so pictures.
Fantastic.
And again, those pictures were almost exclusively found by my daughter. She managed to find the pictures not only of places, but people that I mentioned in there. She tried to get at least one picture in every fold of the pages.
Oh, that is awesome. Doug, what are we forgetting? I don't want to take too much time. I want to be respectful about time.
Well, I do want to take a moment. I warned Eric I would ask you a William James question. That in your autobiography, you note many identities about father and brother and grandfather and great-grandfather and teacher and scholar and climber and boater and so on, and woodworker and other things like that. So Eric may not know you share this connection. Is there a unified whole in this? I'm going to sound briefly Jamesian. Can you talk about a self of selves that transcends all of these identities?
Self of selves?
A self of selves, what James would call a spiritual self that transcends all of your various identities or integrates all of your various.
I guess my answer to that is the same kind of agnosticism that I have about a theological question. Is there or isn't there? Subjectively, well, yes, sort of. There's a me that remembers all this stuff, and of which each of these facets is a facet. But is there something like that? I don't know how to point to it or how to find it or how to provide evidence for it. For that matter, my epistemology is empiricism and rationality. There's good evidence for something and good logical reasons to support something, then that's good reason to start thinking it might be true.
Would you characterize yourself as a Gestalt psychologist today? What camp would you put yourself in?
Cognitive.
You had to. Cognitive. Okay, very good.
Cognitive psychologist, amateur, and even more amateur historian of psychology.
I'm not so sure. Okay, all right. I'm gonna be respectful and agree with you. I'm not so sure that's actually true. I'd like
Gestalt
an operational definition.
Yes, I think Gestalt psychology still has a lot to offer, and it's being in a way rediscovered in places like visual and cognitive neuroscience.
Absolutely. Doug, what else? I've totally dominated this, and I feel a little bit bad, but not too bad, because I've had a delightful time asking Michael all of these questions.
So I'll say, Michael, that several stories in your book affected me very powerfully. I have described your interactions with Donald Hebb to more people.
Oh, that was such a beautiful experience.
And I
mentioned that to Eric.
Eric, no. Would you share that with us, please?
Yes. Near the beginning of my being a graduate student at Harvard, John Beebe Center was $1 a year man there. He was the inheritor of the Heinz 57 force. He knew that I knew some German. He had read a monograph by von Zenden about summarizing the literature of people born blind who developed sight thereafter. And Hebb, in his, was it 1950 book, I think, The Organization of Behavior, cited Zenden as providing evidence that learning is required to learn to see, that it's not immediate by any chance. And B.B. Center had read this book, and he said he wasn't sure that all of the cases that von Zenden discussed really supported that point of view, and asked me to read it and see what I think. And he was right. Quite a few of the examples, the cases in von Zenden's book indicated that certain kinds of visual recognition occurred almost immediately without learning. So he suggested I write a note for the American Journal of Psychology. B.B. Center was infinitely patient. He went with me over maybe 6, 7, 8 successive drafts, just the first page or so. This sentence implies such and so. Is that really what you mean? This word is that the right word there? I'm just said a bit too much about this here. You need to say some more about that. And so 6, 7 drafts or more. When we were finally satisfied with the draft, he suggested I send it to Hebb. I did, and Hebb sent it back within a week with all kinds of excellent suggestions, stylistic and otherwise, but also strengthening my case against him. And the integrity of that guy, unbelievable. Published. Well, it was an extremely useful experience for the young graduate student. That real scholars in the field would do that kind of thing, would help a graduate student strengthen a paper that was to be published against that person's theory.
Well, what strikes me about it is that, of course, he knew the weaknesses in his own work, as it was his work, but his generosity in sharing it and not being afraid to let the science speak for itself.
Not only just not being afraid, but using it to strengthen the case against himself. Unbelief.
Yeah. I know we're being loose with the language, which is fine, but perhaps he didn't take it personally.
No,
perhaps it was he was okay with it, the case against his work. And he didn't take it personally. The case against his theory, which so many of us
values.
Right.
Objectivity. What's the evidence show?
Right. Exactly. So, Michael, that brings me to something and by the way, I should have mentioned this at first. Hopefully, I did in an email. If upon reflection, if there's any of this you would like me to edit out, I will. So I would be happy to do that. And I may be coming to a question which leads us to that. You know, the Hebb story is one of these delightful surprises that you've shared. So I would ask you, do you have any other people across the history of your career that just wowed you in a pleasant way?
The one that jumps out is Robbie McLeod, Robert S. McLeod.
Sure.
Who was one of my professors at Swarthmore, including a seminar on language and thought, which I found absolutely brilliant, which ended up with this cognitive aspects of language course that I taught at the end of my career. He had a respect for knowledge, for students, for languages, for cultures, for scholarship, and I never saw anyone else. You need to learn some foreign languages, among other things, so that you can start to think in the way other people think. And as an academic, you do have the obligation to do at least some administrative work at some time in your career. Sorry. Department chair or something like that. Other things like that. Very modest guy, brilliant scholar, wonderful model.
You mentioned, I keep saying I'm going to be respectful and stop soon, and I really promise I will. I'm just having too much fun. I have to admit. You mentioned just now the ability to speak a different language and understand other people. Do you get back to Germany very often, or have you not been back in a while? Do you still have a family home there? And again, these are personal questions that are none of my business. So,
last question, no family. I did get to Germany quite often during my career, and in fact, gave the first Max Wertheimer lecture at the University of Frankfurt when they initiated an annual lecture
That's great.
in Frankfurt.
Yeah,
And I gave that lecture in the same hall that my father had lectured in.
Oh,
Started off in German, but just the first 10 minutes or so, 5 minutes, and the rest was in English.
That's lovely. I studied German in high school and a little bit in college, and I did have a chance to visit as a young man, and so I have not been to Frankfurt, but I have been to Munich and other places in the South. But
well, I did get to Germany quite often. Not well. I guess the last time was maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago. I don't.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
I gave again a celebratory lecture at the University of Würzburg when they developed an archive of history of psychology. And at Bielefeld, I gave one, I guess it was in 2012, on the occasion of the centenary of my father's 1912. Languages have been really fun for me. Obviously, my native language was German. I was 6 when I came to this country. Had a wonderful experience in first grade, knowing absolutely no English. Teacher, Miss Eric, managed to get the class not to tease me, but to help me learn English. And within months, I was doing interpreting for my parents. I had some Spanish and French in high school, a 1-year course in Latin Greek in high school, at Fieldston School. Monday was Latin, Tuesday was Greek, Wednesday was Latin, Thursday was Greek. There was enough interference. I learned enough roots so that I became fascinated by etymology.
Interleaving doesn't always work, does it?
And then when our youngest son started going to 3rd grade, they stopped having Spanish in the 3rd grade. There's some talk of skipping him or something like that, but for various reasons that seemed unwise. I knew I was going to be going to Sweden 2 years hence for the summer. So he and I enrolled in a Swedish class at the University of Colorado.
Of course we did.
9, and I think he did better than over half the class. So some Swedish, had 1 month's intensive 1 hour daily of Chinese just before I was along with Marilyn on a jaunt to China with a bunch of librarians, some Portuguese, some Icelandic. I just find languages an awful lot of fun. I like the old Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I think there's still a lot to be said. And it's a very useful experience to be competent enough in another language so that you can see the world through the eyes of that language. Different languages really have a very different way of categorizing human experience. The obvious things like the second person, which is only a singular one. In modern English, used to have thee and thou. That's gone. In Japanese, there's something like 30 different versions of the second person. And if you use the wrong form, that can be quite insulting. Even such simple things as I mentioned, Doug has heard all this stuff. So in Spanish, the whole idea of agency is quite different. If I drop a cup and break it, I'm the one who did that in English. Spanish, no, it's reflexive. Se cayó, se rompió. It broke itself. I have nothing to do with it. Stuff. And languages are fun, exciting, kind of a mirror of the culture.
Absolutely.
It's been fun. Thank you.
It has been fun. It truly has.
One little poem I wrote when I was a kid, I think it's also in the autobiography. Use well your time. You have not much.
I think we'll stop there. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time today.